Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be back with Alec again. And thanks so much for what you do. There's so much dedication that is involved in being of service to your fellow man. And I really appreciate what you're doing. Delighted to be joined with so many state legislators from across the country who are involved with not only state but national policy. And it's so important for us to really come together to really discuss some of the issues and look at some of the challenges, learn from some of the best practices. And so for that reason, I thank you for making the effort to be here. Now, as you know, I had a whole nother life before coming here. Some people always ask me, why would you go from a successful career in medicine to government? And I sometimes ask myself that too. But, the fact of the matter is, it really is kind of a natural thing because as a pediatric neurosurgeon, I spent so much time, many times operating all night long on little babies, trying to give them a second chance at life. And usually being successful, only a few days later to be in a terrible position of, in many cases, having to send them back into a terrible environment with mold and lead and rats, and roaches and crime. And I felt terrible. Sometimes I would order extra tests so they could stay in the hospital an extra day or two. Don't tell anybody. But, now there's an actual opportunity to do something about those environments. And that's really what makes it worthwhile. And, it turns out that understanding the brain was really a very good training for diagnosing what's going wrong here in Washington. Only problem is I can't operate on them, but I'm sure many of you here have experienced the same kinds of challenges here in Washington. And sometimes you get up in the morning, you think nobody cares and nobody appreciates it, but they really do. And I'm comforted in knowing that all of us here today are united in the belief that the strength of our country really lies in our values, our democratic values, in the fact that people actually do care about their neighbors, have a strong sense of community. We've created an amazing country. I mean, where else in the world do you see caravans of people trying to get into the country? Sometimes we should maybe look at the positive aspect of some of the things that are going on. And, we have such a strong country. There's no outside force that can bring us down. The only thing that can bring us down is us, ourselves. Sometimes I think we're sort of like the family that wins the lottery. And they think they've got it made forever. Well, 55% of those lottery winners end up in worse shape because they destroy themselves. They make bad decisions. They have terrible judgment. And one of the things we need to understand in this country is that we're not each other's enemies. And we need to stop allowing people to divide us up and to make us think that we're enemies. We have a tremendous amount of talent and a tremendous amount of compassion and a tremendous ability to do what's right and what's good if we're willing to do that, to listen to our better angels. And when we start doing things for people, we need to do things for all of our people. It shouldn't be, some identity group du jour. Every day, it should be about everybody and what impacts everybody because we have a diverse society and we can't allow ourselves to be divided amongst identity groups. We'll never be successful that way. So what are we trying to accomplish at HUD, one of the largest federal agencies? The mission is really much greater than just putting a roof over people's head. We really want to provide people with a path to self-sufficiency, For decades and decades, under multiple administrations of different parties, we've been satisfied to just kind of put a roof over people's head and think that we've done our duty. But the fact of the matter is, our people are our most important resource. They're our most valuable resource. And what we need to be thinking about is how do we develop our people? And we have to also provide them with the tools that are needed for this development. It doesn't do any good just to say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. A lot of people have lived in an environment for generations where that wasn't a part of their thinking. When you talk about the American dream, they think that that's for somebody else. It's not for them. They just need to be taken care of. That's one of the reasons that we came up with the Envision Center initiative. It comes from the Bible. Proverbs 29:18 says, without a vision, the people perish. We have a lot of people who don't have a vision. We need to make sure that we give them that vision. That vision should be a part of every American's lives. And how do we do that? It requires everybody at the same table. So not only are we utilizing resources from 23 different federal agencies, but also from state and local agencies, nonprofits, faith-based organizations, the for-profit section, bringing them all under one roof to provide the kind of wraparound services that have been effective in some other areas. For instance, you think about the fact that 1% of our population protects the other 99%, those who volunteer for our military service. And in many cases, when they come back, they're not the same people they were when they went in. There's a lot of potential trauma that can occur. And PTSD can occur even when you're not in the middle of a battlefield. Because if you're near a lot of artillery, even in a practice setting, you still get the impact of that blow. And it can have the same kind of impact as multiple hits on a football field in terms of producing chronic traumatic encephalopathy. The point being, when people go out of their way to serve and protect us, and they come back and they have a need, we need to be responsive. And what we've found that if you just provide them with housing, in many cases that's not adequate. If you just provide them with wraparound, clinical services and things of that nature, that's not enough. But when you give them both, you provide them with the material they need as well as the social support, many of those cases, they're able to get off the street, out of homelessness. In fact, homelessness year over year, we just reported a couple of weeks ago, is down 5.4% for veterans. 3 states have declared an effective end to homelessness. 64 communities across 33 states. And the flagship program is the HUD VASH program, where HUD provides the housing, the VA supportive housing, which is the VASH part, provides the wraparound services. And the reason I bring that up in conjunction with the Envision Centers is because we believe the same thing happens if we go into the areas where we have a lot of dependency in our society and we provide them also with the same thing, the housing and the wraparound services, the appropriate types of services, then they can begin to get that vision. It means we have to change some things also. For instance, rental reform becomes vital. You've probably heard that we've embarked on some rental reform, but depending on which media you listen to, you might get the impression that the only thing we really want to do is triple the rents on the most vulnerable people. Well, that's a bunch of crap. The fact of the matter is, we've protected the elderly and the disabled. We're talking about work-able people who are paying the minimum monthly rent of $25 to $50. And if they get any type of a job in an atmosphere where people are looking for workers, people are looking for trainees, they will be making more money than the minimum rent is relevant for. So it doesn't even matter to them. You know, these are kinds of things that sometimes those with different agendas don't make clear to people. But what we have to remember, particularly people who are working in the public sphere service, you know, obviously you're not here to make money, and obviously, you know, you're giving up a lot of other things. Where the real reward is changing people's lives. Changing people's lives for the better, and using all the resources that we have together to make that happen. And one of the things that really encourages me as I travel around the country, and I meet so many people who are good and decent people, who are willing to lend a helping hand to their neighbor. They're not the people that you see on the 6:30 news running around trying to make everybody's lives miserable. That's not the average person. And what we have to do in our spheres of influence is encourage people to speak up. Encourage people to talk about the good things that are going on, the good things that they're able to do. I'd love to point you to humans of HUD. When you go home today, just pull your computer out. If you want to have some fun, go to HUD.gov and look up. This is better than HBO, let me tell you. And tap the Humans of HUD tab. And you'll see wonderful stories about some of the people we serve. The one story I'd like to share today is from David in Charleston, South Carolina. In his story, I quote, David says, "I enrolled into the substance abuse training program in July of 2000. After 4 attempts, God still did not give up on me. I successfully completed the program and was hired at Goodwill. I worked there for a year before entering the HUD-VASH program. Eventually, I came on part-time at the Veterans Hospital. I excelled at my job and was hired full-time. The housing program helped me to establish myself back into society, and today I'm independent and 8 years sober. I have to thank the staff of the housing program for making me a productive member of society, clean, sober, and independent. Praise Jesus." That's his testimony. And, you know, there are a lot more like that. You know, one that I was reading recently was a young woman who finally got a housing choice voucher. She's having trouble getting anybody to accept it, but she finally got, and then she found an apartment and got enrolled in one of our self-sufficiency programs, actually got a nursing degree. And today, she is a nurse, a homeowner, and a landlord who accepts housing choice vouchers. I mean, it really is quite an amazing turnaround and a story. But that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about people, and people being our resources and being able to utilize them the right way. You know, going back to the housing choice voucher thing, one of the real problems has been people don't want to accept the vouchers. We just completed a national listening tour in which we went from coast to coast talking to landlords to finding out what were their problems, why would they not accept vouchers. And it's really quite eye-opening. There's a lot of things that can be and will be done quite rapidly to change that whole thing. And it's really not because they're bad people. A lot of them have very, very legitimate concerns. And one of the things that's so important for government to do is actually to listen to the people. Because, you know, the government is actually the employee of the people. It's not the other way around. And if you're going to be a good employee, shouldn't you actually know what you're supposed to be doing, what it is that they want you to be doing, what is practical, and what actually works, rather than dictating to people and saying that we know best. Doesn't mean that having government experience isn't important. It is important. You know, I'm the beneficiary of it. I can tell you at HUD, even though we have the ugliest building in D.C., we have the best people. I mean, we have some tremendous individuals there with great experience, tremendous amount of wisdom, and it is extremely beneficial. I got to tell you, when I first came on, I had no assistant secretaries, no deputy secretary. For 5 months, I had nobody. Every day was like drinking from a fire hydrant. Even today, almost 2 years later, we still don't have our Assistant Secretary of Public and Indian Housing, our second biggest department outside of FHA. And, you know, people playing politics. You know, we still don't have our president of Ginnie Mae. We still don't have our IG. We still don't have our Policy Development and Research Assistant Secretary. It's craziness, just absolute craziness. But fortunately, we have a deep bench. We have people who are willing to work and a lot of workaholics who recognize that what we're trying to do is a big thing, and that is to turn this aircraft carrier around so that we're now focused on how do we develop our people, all of our people, including our people who are imprisoned. You think about this reentry program that we're talking about for prisoners and inmates. We need to understand that a lot of people who end up in that penal system are born into environments that almost direct them to the penal system. A lot of these young men are born to family with no father figure. The first authority figure they ever run into is a police officer or someone who's better than they are in their neighborhood. Doesn't work out for them either way. You get so many people who then wind up in jail with little in the way of education, little in the way of skills. And that's why when they get out, the recidivism rate is so high. You know, we need to realize that those people are resources. And one of the programs that I really enjoyed visiting was in Jacksonville, Florida, a reentry program where they went into the prisons, started working with the inmates, giving them education, giving them skills, hooking them up with the 5 employers who would take people from prison. And they did so well, they now have 135 employers who will take people out of prison. They have more jobs for prisoners than they have people to take the jobs. And I had a chance to sit down with some of these prisoners, and they looked just like you and me. They had suits, they had a tie on, the ladies were well-dressed, well-spoken. Resources. That's what we have to start thinking about, our people as resources and fixing things for them, because for everyone that we can keep from going down that path of self-destruction, that's one more tax-paying, productive member of society who may discover a cure for cancer or a new energy source. We can't afford to waste any of them. And then, you know, we have to think about housing. Now, a lot of times when people think about HUD, they just think about the very poor. But remember, our biggest division is FHA. And, you know, we've done many things to strengthen FHA over the last year or two. When I came in, one of the first controversies was about FHA because a pre-scheduled reduction in the mortgage insurance fund was already on the way. And if we had reduced the fee, we would have fallen below the statutory mandate of 2% capital reserve. And that would have created a whole lot of problems. So we did appropriate homework, saw that that wasn't necessarily the right thing to do. We had all these PACE loans where they were the first lien position, put the taxpayers in the second lien position. We had tremendous hemorrhage going on from the HECM program, the reverse mortgage program. done a lot of good work in there. Bryant Montgomery, we finally got an FHA commissioner after a very long and hard struggle, has done a fabulous job in helping to turn that around. There are a lot of things that are being done. More than 1 million for mortgages last year, and 83% of those were for first-time home buyers, 34% for minority home buyers. A lot of things being done to increase home ownership, but it has to be done in a responsible way. Why is home ownership so important? The average renter has a net worth of $5,000. The average homeowner has a net worth of $200,000. It's a huge difference there. And they realized that back before the housing crisis more than a decade ago. And so that created the need, they thought, for all these subprime mortgages and other kinds of manipulations of credit. Well, that didn't work so well. And if you put somebody in a house they can't afford, you're not really doing them a favor. They lose the house, their credit, and their future opportunities. Those are lessons that we've learned, and we're incorporating those into the things that we're doing now, still with the aim of getting people into homes. And there are a lot of things that we're doing with rental reform and with self-sufficiency that put people in a much better position to be able to achieve those homes. So that's sort of a smattering. That's really just a very small smattering of the many kinds of things that we're doing. Obviously, we have a lot to do with the long-term recovery from natural disasters. You know, since I've been in office, we've had 5 major hurricanes. And we've got the fires also going on. There's been a lot of stuff. But again, a lot of people have stepped up to the plate. We've been able to work very well with FEMA, Small Business Administration, other parts of the administration to get things done. You look at a place like Puerto Rico that was utterly destroyed. 99.9% of the people now have electricity, which was better than before Maria, quite frankly. And there are a lot of other things going on. We're working with manufactured housing because they have a lot to offer, and removing some of those regulations. A lot of times when people think about manufactured housing, they're thinking in terms of trailers. Well, forget about that. You know, beautiful modular homes. They look better than site-built homes, quite frankly, 30% less expensive, tend to tolerate natural disasters better. You're looking at a lot of other innovative products that can be used, even some of the computerized building. I'm going down in January to look at that. You know, we need to bring this thing up to the modern era because we've had a lot of technological advances. And that brings me to the whole IT situation. You know, HUD, including the FHA, has been far behind as far as IT is concerned. A platform that's so archaic, I guess the only benefit is no one can hack it because they can't understand it. But, you know, we are in the process of working very hard and fixing that now, working actually with GSA as one of the first 2 centers of excellence for the government in terms of bringing things up to date and making them work better. We recently broke ground on the 100,000th RAD conversion of a public housing unit. Rental assistance demonstration, if there's anybody that doesn't know what that is, creating public-private partnerships so that we can get the capital expenditures under control, the backlog, which is like $30 billion, but when we do it through the RAD program, that takes care of that. And, you know, it's generated close to $6 billion in construction investment and created over 108,000 jobs. And to be able to do the same thing through the traditional means, we estimate would take about 46 years to accumulate the enough capital to be able to do that. So, and getting rid of the regulations. When it comes to affordable housing, you know, the biggest impediment to building affordable housing are the regulations, the zoning regulations, all the other regulatory structures. You look at some of the places that have the biggest problems, like Los Angeles, 80% of the land can only be used for building single-family constructions with a certain amount of property. Then they have all these regulations, the latest of which is you have to have solar energy. I mean, it's craziness. That's why you see people out with all those tents. They could be making $60,000, $70,000 a year. They can't afford any place. You look at San Francisco Bay area, median home price, $1.6 million. And these are not, I mean, these are not nice homes as far as I'm concerned. But, you know, this is what happens when we allow the regulations to stack up the way they do. A lot of these regulations are 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 years old, have nothing to do with what's going on. The density regulations, all of these kinds of things might have been relevant 50 years ago, not relevant now. Don't take into account the advances that have been made in building techniques. You know, all of those things are things that have to be changed. We don't have the authority to change them, but we do have the ability to work with the localities who do have the ability to change them. And, you know, there are certain incentives that we can offer that will help people to look at those things and work together. And then we have to educate people also. You know, NIMBYism, not in my backyard. I love poor people. I love people disadvantaged, but I don't want them anywhere near me. You know, people, you know, base that on a lot of old thinking. If you think about public housing in the 60s and the 70s, big conglomerations that nobody put any thought into, and the government would build them and then leave them, and they would immediately start to deteriorate. Rats and roaches and bed bugs and mold and lead and just craziness. It's not done that way anymore. Now we do public-private partnerships where the private sector has a vested interest in making sure that that property remains viable. And we're not talking about building them in the middle of an established neighborhood. We're talking about putting them in appropriate locations so that teachers and firemen and police officers can live in the same community where they work. Doing that in a logical fashion is beneficial to everybody, but that requires education. You can't expect people just to know what you're doing. So we have to get out there and talk about it. That's why I go around the country a lot talking to different groups, because, you know, I don't expect most of the media to actually tell people what we're doing. So we have to get out there and tell it ourselves. But I want you to promote HUD.gov. You'll find out what's going on. And like I said before, it's actually quite entertaining as well. And, you know, the last thing I just want to say is there are a lot of ways that we can make a government more transparent, make it more accountable, get rid of a lot of the bureaucracy. You know, I hate bureaucrats. You know, bureaucrats are people who think that the rules are more important than the goals. And, you know, I have a surgical mentality. Surgeons say, what's the problem? Okay, let's deal with it before the patient dies. And when in doubt, cut it out. But, you know, we need to cut out a lot of these regulations, a lot of these things that are getting in the way. And, you know, I just want to thank all the people here who have made so many sacrifices to make life better for their fellow Americans. Thank you so much.